Hi, this is Laura Wansick, and I'm so excited to share one of the ways that I use the stamp set from the Wildflower and Honey collection. So here I'm just cutting out some of the foundation's paper in 3x4 cards, and I thought I would try a few different techniques with the watercolor brushes as a pattern to put below the stamp of the flower and the leaves. And originally I thought that I would create these patterns and then just stamp the flower right on them, but I ended up using texture glaze and I realized I wasn't going to be able to stamp evenly. So what I ended up doing was stamping onto vellum and then putting the vellum over these backgrounds that I create. So put a little bit of the watercolor paint down and then diluted it with some water and using one of the brushes to just kind of paint random patterns on. And here I'm making this strip and I really like the way it is darker at the bottom, but every time I lay it down, it fills back in. So what I did was I laid it on top of a stamping block, and that puts it at an angle, which then makes the shaded, the dark part at the bottom stay there and dry like that. So that's kind of a fun technique that I discovered playing with all of these products for this. I love these different pinks. I got the idea for the color scheme for this flower and these leaves from the photos for this layout. There was some greens and some pinks, and actually I'm wearing a dress. You haven't seen it yet, but in one of the photos for this layout I'm wearing a dress with flowers that look really similar to this flower. So I had the idea to kind of mimic that, the style of those flowers, and to use the teals and the pinks as kind of the basis. And I really like the way that that turned out. I'm new to all this, so much of this is just me playing and figuring things out. I use the brayer a lot, I find, because I feel like it sort of softens what I do. So sometimes I do things and I'm like, whoa, that's a lot. And then I put a brayer over it and then I suddenly like it. So there I took some of the Vicki Boutin paint and I'm mixing it with texture glaze, and then I run it through the stencils, and I liked how that turned out. And I played around a lot. Some of the pieces that I made I didn't end up liking, and some of them I did. And that's why this is nice, because then you can kind of decide exactly which parts of what you create you're going to use, um, as opposed to doing a background where you kind of have to commit a little bit more. And whenever I have extra, I just run it through the stencil on a piece of paper, because I figure I could use it for something later, give it to my daughter. That always excites her because she sees what I'm doing and she wants to have what I'm working on. So if I have these extra pieces ready to go, that sometimes excites her. Oh, it looks like it's blurry there. I forgot to refocus it. I need to remember to do that. So here I'm going to stamp onto the vellum with the flower, and I do it several times with several of the different stamps just to kind of see what works. Now this ink, I actually let it dry overnight and it was still wet, or it's still wiped off to the touch. And I think it's because it's just so shimmery and metallic-y. So if you're going to do this, just know that it's not really ever gonna dry. Or I don't know, maybe it takes a longer time. I couldn't get it to dry. Maybe if I had like put a dryer over it, I don't know. But that was fine because it's so shimmery that it's worth it. I just had to be extra careful in the way that I adhered it. And I wasn't sure like how I was gonna adhere down the vellum, because you can always see adhesive through it. Even when I've bought glue sticks that supposedly you don't see, I always see it. So I had the idea to run it through my sewing machine. And I really liked how that turned out, because then the edges of them could be separated. So like the end of those leaves there, because it's sewn at the bottom of the leaf, so the top can be separated, which creates some dimension. And the way that I ended up making the layout, the sewn part is hidden. And so the parts that are the vellum and the paper like that, I'm just pulling it up there, you can see that in the layout. So I was really excited about how that turned out. So I've made all these different pieces, and then I was like, okay, what am I going to do with them? So I have this 3x8 paper here, and the idea here was to make kind of a title. I didn't really have any journaling for these photos. These are photos of me at Target clothes shopping. And I just kind of I liked the Be Awesome, and I really like the piece that says I was not meant to be subtle, that die cut piece. So those were the only pieces that I was going to use in terms of words or a title. So I stamped Be Awesome several different times, because again, I was going to play around and see what worked. So I did it like, I don't know, 4 or 5 different times. And then I wanted to put some texture paste over it, or texture glaze over it, but not directly over the title. So I took, how did I do that? How did I mask it? Oh, I took some of the washi tape, the Wildflower and Honey washi tape that was just the right thickness, and I put it over the Be Awesome, and then I did texture glaze over that, and then peeled back the washi tape to reveal the title. So there I'm putting the washi, now I'm doing the texture glaze, now I'm peeling that up, and it leaves just the title. And I really like how that turned out. And then I cut that out, mounted it on some of the black pattern paper, and then put it between the flowers. And the flowers are kind of bursting out of the title from the top and the bottom. And then I had an extra flower, and I wasn't sure what to do with that either. And I ended up putting it on the white space of one of the photos. And again, you can see here, I'm not sure how to adhere it because every time I touch it, some of the ink gets on my fingers. So I used different parts of my hand and then cleaned my hand and used a glue tip instead of the roller, and it turned out fine. So here I'm putting on the negative space there of that photo of me. I love that sentiment with that photo of me and that huge hat. I feel like that was perfect. I used the tiny attacher. I also realized that was a perfect way to adhere it. So I think I ended up using the tiny attacher actually to adhere the flowers on the other section as well, because I knew that that would last forever. I also got some ink smudged on the I Was Not Made to Be Subtle circle, but I'm not a perfectionist about stuff like that. It is what it is. We'll call it artsy, right? I also didn't wait for that texture paste to dry, so that got on me while I was playing around. I'm not very patient. That's the hardest thing for me about mixed media, is that you really have to wait for layers to dry, and I am not good at that, like, at all. So there the full spread is. Sorry, there's glare on my face there. And then the last thing I did was stamped the Enjoy Today there and wrote Target, shopping at Target, and the date. Because that's really all I had to say. Usually I have tons of journaling, but for this one it was mostly just photos in the end. So you can see the smudge there on that circle. But I really like the dimension that was created by adding the vellum. And I actually like the way that the ink kind of smudged, because I think that it was a little bit artsy and just makes it a little bit more fun and unique. So I really like how this turned out. That masking technique worked great with the washi tape as well. And I like the machine stitching as well, the way that that looked. So thanks for checking it out.